Prabhala, what it means to write erotica, introduce LGBT issues in Kannada literature, and translate pulp fiction. Rosalyn D'Mello is making a subject that is normally a closed-door affair her own, women's erotica, a new emerging genre that is finding its voice in the literary world. She is editor-in-chief of Art Info India and is in fact currently editing Venus Flytrap, an anthology of women's erotica to be published soon by Zuban Books, India's leading feminist publishing house. Besides being an art writer and freelance journalist, she is also the force behind Please Mend the Gap, a volunteer-led initiative to promote gender equality in public spaces. She has completed her first book, A Handbook for My Lover, which is being represented by London-based agent David Godwin. She was nominated for the Forbes Emerging Art Writer of the Year in 2014. Vasudhendra's eclectic background includes an engineering degree from NITK, Suratkal, a master's from IISc, Bangalore, and 20 years in IT, serving as vice president in an MNC. He found his calling as an author and has written several award-winning books in Kannada. He runs a publishing house, Chanda Pustaka, publishing young Kannada writers. His passion to promote writing and original narratives in Kannada has led him to institute an award, Chandaka Pustaka Bahumana, which is given to a young short story writer every year by publishing his first anthology along with a cash prize. He has published several books in Kannada, including Manishe Yugadi, Chelu, Hampi Express, Kotigalu. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing these right, I'm trying. Nammamma Andre Nangishta, Rakshaka Anatha, Varnamaya, Mithuna, Adrushya Kavya. His recent book, Mohanaswamy, has been discussed extensively as it revolves around a homosexual protagonist. Our next speaker, Rakesh Khanna. He was born in Berkeley, California in 1972 to an Indian father and American mother and moved to India in his 20s. In 2008, he and his wife, Rashmi Ruth Devadasan, co-founded Bluff Publications, a small alternative publishing house based in Chennai that focuses on translations of Asian and African language pulp fiction, graphic novels, and offbeat fiction. His other extremely esoteric interests include topological graph theory, marine invertebrates, and banging on things to see what they sound like. Perhaps he and Shivamani could come together and make percussion harmony. He is the editor of the Bluff anthology of Tamil pulp fiction and the Obituary Journal. Achal Prabhala, he is a writer and researcher. He writes for Chimurenga, where he is a contributing editor and Bedouin, among several other publications. He is co-editor of two recent books, The Best of Quest and Civil Lines 6. His research work expands access to medicines and knowledge. He has worked with governments and civil society in numerous countries across sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, and he serves on the expert advisory group of the Medicines Patent Pool and the advisory board of the Wikimedia Foundation. He was educated at Middlesbrough College and Yale University and has lived and worked in India, Guyana, and South Africa.
Rakesh has several published books from a publishing firm that he runs. Rosalyn has much published work, but the book that she's going to read from and we're going to talk about hasn't yet been published. I want to say, what a great panel, no? I mean, there's queer literature, there's erotica, and pulp fiction. So this is exactly what I'm interested in. I think I'm here as a kind of happy accident. But if I had to choose a set of books or a set of categories of things that I wanted to read and that I read, in fact, this would exactly be it. But I'm not sure that they necessarily, fit in this way in any other form. I mean, I don't go to bookshops where I see, queer literature, erotica, and pulp fiction together. And it's sort of an interesting and fortuitous and wonderful thing that they're all clubbed together in all these three categories into one. But also curious, and I'd like you to think about that a little bit, when we go along. Since, Rosalyn, your book isn't out yet, I was wondering firstly whether you could tell us a little bit about how long you've been working on it, what your working title is. I've read it because I'm going to speak to her about it, and so you'll get to know a little bit about it. But maybe you can introduce it a little better because people here or I won't have the chance to go out and buy it immediately after. Yeah. So would you like to start?
Hello. So the title of my book, My Lover, is something I began writing a while ago, and essentially the result of a conversation I had with my lover about I'm speaking about a guy and this beautiful man, long-standing crush. And playing the violin is really beautiful. And I was my lover that day. So the lover says how many men have me. So I laugh when you're one to talk. He's right now 30 different. So I said that when you so and then I told him, I'll tell you, but I feel like you right to the right. And the moment down the phone that night, I suddenly said about sending me emails. I love writing letters. And reading them without responding to them. So I started about it, and then I came title in my head of my lover. And I think that's the process began 5 years ago, and I initially thought the kind that I would write 2 months. It would be with the idea manual and just have I didn't really think of it as something publisher that I should and the potentially it has documentation which that every time I had a fight, I wrote it and I got that moment of writing fight. Or every time they had sex, I would write down what happened, how did it, so I started enjoying this process of dissecting, and the reason I fight with him, I thought it this, and then I go so suddenly kind of became a idea, and it felt like our relationship together. He's a well-known photographer, and so it's been really interesting to have a relation writer with somebody who is also photography.
So that's wonderful, Rosalyn. And one of the really exciting things about reading your book was that I did not know it was non-fiction. And as I was joking with you just outside, I was saying, look, I am an outsider to the art world, and yet I recognize some of those names. And how are you going to continue writing? But on a more serious note, what's exciting and what excited me about reading your book is that so it would be not unfair to call it something like a memoir of lust, yeah? Because it's not even just about, it's not about relationships. It's not about, it's not a search for love or lust. I mean, you find it often and joyously in the book. And that's what pleases me very much, because often the only vocabulary with which we write about sex is in this series of pyramidical euphemisms, no? Starting with making love and then going up to soulmate and everything else that goes with it. But I was wondering, and so perhaps we'll just start with your book, because I think that there's a really interesting tangent there to Vasudhendra's work. Well, the first thing, as somebody who, I love pornography, and I think that it's an essential part of mine, and I think many other people's lives. what's the difference between pornography and erotica? Yeah, and I understand that many people trying to produce literature today don't want to label themselves as pornographers. I can see why, but I can't understand why, and I don't fully know what the difference is. So how would you describe that, and how would you describe it in relation to your own work? Some of it is, obviously there's a lot of sex, a lot of the sex is very good, and I think that the literature of sex should be able to function both as literature as well as perform the function of pornography. No?
That's actually very, I haven't thought about erotica, and in my opinion, I find erotica very thick line, actually, I thought that you were small. This was something I just wrote yesterday because somebody writing for a website about beauty, and I thought it would be about what I think about erotica. He is a very moment. It must precision, a votive beheading, a dissection, a meditation, the zealous fraction of flesh. The smaller the substance, the more delirious. His eyes to slant. The girl with the tip of the speaking point around the circumference. Ushers corner the street car along with the other depositions. Then the second, third. The round is now bereft. Love child, fruit of my offspring, translucent flesh, material that after contact texture. Then Holland, the Epicurean glides again, sucks in the liquid remains, tears into the substance until all memory of the experience. Starboard, beauty lies. So I just wanted to give you
that a little more. And so one writer who you mentioned in your text, who I'm a great admirer of, Anais Nin. So Anais Nin wrote what is maybe, I think, the most stimulating poem I've ever read. Also, I think perhaps among the first kinds of porn I had access to, a book called The Delta of Venus. It was written in the 1940s. Anais Nin was a struggling writer in Paris with a whole bunch of people in the Belle Epoque, and was, I think, conducting affairs with Henry Miller and a whole bunch of other people. At that time, she was commissioned by an American collector of porn to write porn at $1 a page or something like that. It was an offer too good for her to pass up, so she produced this remarkable piece of work called Delta of Venus, which is one of those things, I think, that most starkly highlights how there is little or no difference between erotica and pornography. But coming to that, there's, I think, something quaintly archaic about writing the erotic in words. In an age when, even with a simple smartphone and a basic data connection, you can encounter a proliferation of images. It's a sort of pornography of images, right? In terms of the way pornography is most consumed or produced today. And the word seems, in comparison, even less so than the picture, a very subtle and almost antique form of expressing sensuality or writing pornography or making pornography. And I was thinking that one of the problems with that, of articulating an unabashed, unbridled sensuality, pornography in India, is the fact that there's a template. that template for pornography is the same template that Anglophone middle-class Indians grow up on, which is, Playboy, or if you're a little adventurous, Playgirl or Hustler or whatever it is. And it's both astonishing that it remains such a powerful template, what pornography is and how it should be conducted, as well as how difficult it has been to surpass. And I think that there was this moment when, I'm not sure how many of you saw this, but there was an unfortunate leaked personal sex tape, I think, called Mysore Mallike, that made the rounds of this city and I think many cities some years ago. And it was extraordinary for its tenderness, but also extraordinary, I think, for its unintentional articulation of a sexuality and a depiction of sex that people like us could relate to far, far better, because it was something happening between two brown-skinned bodies, which is fairly rare in pornography, and in a geographical location that was somewhat similar to us, with habits that were somewhat similar to ours. And I think that what's exciting about your book and what's exciting about reading is the manner in which you're able to be both worldly. I mean, you quote extensively from everyone, from Barthes to Anais Nin to Kamla Das, and it's a central universe in which all of these people exist. And so it's not like you are immune to or trying to fashion some kind of, inherent pure native sexuality, but you are allowing yourself to get into the text as yourself. Interestingly, of course, when I read it, I didn't know it was non-fiction. And you said to me before, and you've said now, that it's non-fiction. And that's super interesting because of something Vasudhendra said. But I'd like you to talk first, before we get to him, about how you thought about expressing yourself as a sexual being in non-fiction. Yeah, so the true story. And whether you were self-conscious about this fact or not, that pornography and that sex itself, despite all kinds of historical antecedents and whatnots in the ancient glory of India, is something that both has very little expression in mainstream respectable literature, as well as very little non-imitative expression.
I think I'll begin by just saying, we were talking about erotica. There's a difference for me is the mental way I think there's a difference between the way erotica is read and enjoyed, and the power dynamics are complicated. So much. I'm not saying about in your space, kind of the gaze. There's so many talking about pornography, which is why
Did you feel that there were those same Did you feel that the same problems persisted when a woman of the kind of Anais Nin wrote pornography?
No, I know. I think what Anais is writing differently, which makes pioneering it is about how you felt the way you're writing characters, the way that experience is folded to them, and I think Anais agency becomes important. In a lot of the writing that I is this idea of agency. And what reason I wanted your knowledge why wasn't afraid to just write as honestly. And there are chapters. There's a whole chapter on masturbation, wanting people to allow yourself to think about your hair. And I realized retrospect how when I was in the act of writing, I was picking and my paper. And when I read the loving, I have to read. And it's only when I I get shy. I don't want to know that this is what I felt. So sort of better. I realized how even brave I was as a writer to writing you can be honest. So much
Except you're doing it for every one of the thousands of people who
but you can't thousands is become easy. More and less to read it. I'm trying to bring it on. I don't like the moment I felt naked because I felt like oh my god, only
you sent me your manuscript, so
I did, but it's nakedness. So I think I have to get used to that feeling.
well, I think you'll have to get used to lots of good feelings, because congratulations, it's a fine book. I can't wait to see it out, and I think that you've done a remarkable job of it. I want to use something that you've said about this book to talk about Vasudhendra's book, because I think it fits in very nicely. I read Rosalyn's book, assuming it was fiction. And just because this is what everyone does, they write stories of their lives and then they call it fiction. So I assumed it was, except it's not. It's non-fiction. Bravo. And in relation to your book, Vasudhendra, which I have here, Mohan Swami, this is Vasudhendra's newest book, published a few years ago, a year ago.
On December 11th.
December 11th. So published just a left-hand corner from Oxford Bookstore, and I'd urge you to buy it. In relation to reading this book, I had encountered a few difficulties. One of them is that I'm a lapsed Kannada reader. I'm half Kannadiga, but I have spent much less than half my life reading Kannada, and as a result, it just takes me very long, and I read very slowly. And I was traveling, and I didn't have the time to sit through it, which is what I'd have required about a month to read the book in detail. So full disclosure, Vasudhendra suggested that I speak to another reader of the book who appreciated it very much and read it carefully and liked it very much. His name is Arvind Narayan. He works at the Alternative Law Forum, and so I had a long conversation with him. I then had a short conversation with Vasudhendra, and I'd like to talk a little bit about what was said to me. But before that, I read an interview with you, I think it was in Deccan Herald, but in some other English newspaper in the country, where Vasudhendra was asked about the protagonist of his book, and about the story and the arc of the story. And I think the question was something like, is this true? And Vasudhendra's answer, and if I may quote you directly, are these words: Mohan Swami is a real person. Every day, every minute, I am in his company. With me, in solitude, he shares his loneliness, his joys, and his sorrows. And I think that's a fine statement that says as much as as needs to be said about where the book came from and how the book was produced. This is what Arvind pointed out to me, and I'll recount that, and then I'd like to talk to you a little bit about both. Arvind talked about two stories in particular. The stories, and please correct me if I'm wrong, are mostly set in small towns and rural Karnataka. The first story that impressed Arvind very much is called Tagane. And Tagane captures what it's like to be, I suppose to be of no fixed gender, or to be gender non-conformative. It starts with the recollections of a young boy in school. The biology teacher is explaining the chromosomal differences between men and women, and has XX and XY, and the biology teacher says, well, and then there are people who don't fit into these categories, and that's him, Shankar Lingegowda. At which point, of course, the young student, Shankar Lingegowda, feels what any such student would feel, which is a mixture of all kinds of negative feelings. The boy grows up and expresses his gender, I'm sorry? Sure. Would you prefer to do that?
No, I think stories should not be told. They should be read, I think. It's.
I agree.
It should be there. I think it's more. It's a very rare story in that collection because it's about a transgender man. Okay, how the transgender man is treated at the village levels. Okay, it becomes almost like a Maryada Hatya. So you know about the Maryada Hatya. But what I have shown is there's a small subtle element is there. Is a friend of him is a gay man. Yeah. But the thing is, the gay man thinks he's more superior than him, than the transgender person. It goes in the story in a very, very subtle way. Always, though he is a gay, he's also the same kind of a person. Transgender is suffering on sexual differentiation. But he thinks he's slightly superior in his manliness compared to a transgender man. So that comes in this thing. But it's more about like how it was based on my friend only. So his parents killed him because he started wearing women dresses. He started wearing sari and started dancing in the street and all. And he started asking for the share in the house. Because I am also son of this house, I need a share. Then his brother said, you cannot have the share because now you are declaring yourself as a woman. Okay, but he started insisting that I also need. It's a very earlier period, okay, so it's my childhood. And finally they decided that this guy is going to create problem both financially as well as related to the Maryada, the respect of the big family. It was a very big family. So they killed him. They hanged him. Okay? So that had disturbed me a lot. But what really disturbed me further is, a friend of mine said, he's like a bed bug. Bed bug means actually, in Kannada we call it as tagani. Okay? It's a bed bug. See, what he said as a reason for it is, just because a person is born in our house doesn't mean that he needs to be respected. Even a bed bug also borns in your house. But you mercilessly, you kill that bed bug. This is the same way and you have to accept it, is what my friend had told me, which had disturbed me a lot. So the story is completely based on that. I think a movie is coming up based on that story, so I'm writing the script for that, so working on that one. So it's better to read. I think a story should not be told. But it's very rare that it's a completely homosexual related stories, but one I bought on the transgender side. So it's about a transgender person. So a small story, Tagni, yeah.
And so what I'll ask you to do then is maybe comment on one thing that Arvind said, which I thought was interesting, which is that in the story, in Tagane, there is a character of a friend of Shankar Lingegowda who is killed, who goes to his parents' house to try and find some answers. The father is very brusque and says, he doesn't exist anymore. At which point, when the friend is walking away, he sees a figure of the mother, I think, who comes out and who seems to suggest that she might want to say something more, or she feels very differently about it, but is unable to express it. And so perhaps this is an interesting thing to talk about, which is when you were putting together these stories, how much did you consciously think about whether to think of the oppression that a young person like this encounters, how much of that you wanted to concentrate on or think about or allow to affect your text in comparison, let's say, to that own boy's journey of self-expression, which at least for a short period of time or in some short periods might be relatively unhindered by the force of people around him who were uncomfortable with him being what he was.
Yeah, I think it's all of that. When you start writing a story, everything starts coming into picture. Like you don't have control on yourself. Some small incident might have created a disturbance and you start writing it up. It takes various forms and shapes actually. Especially that scene where you're talking about, see, father is a man, like he is more worried about the respect of the family and it's the pride of the family and all that. But a mother is a symbol of love. Okay, she would like to express that love, but what's happening here is society doesn't allow you. She finds it so difficult to accept that and move with that against the family, which is 3 men who are there. So you can't go like that. So that's the problem which I'm trying to depict there. It's a typical the mother scene. But what really touches me is like the people still, though we call like the transgenders families. So like what I have really seen, the problem is they ask them to leave the house if the parents come to know that their son as a transgender person, he's expressing his desires to dress like a woman or something like. Generally, they ask them to go, leave the home. But in that way, the gay men, I feel lucky most of the time. Their parents accept them. Okay, that touches me a lot. I brought that also in the story.
Absolutely. So this is one other point that I was touched by. This is something that Arvind said to me. He said that in Kashivira, the story about a young boy growing up in a small town who is in love with a very athletic volleyball player, right? And then one day is by the player's mother is actually encouraged to help him bathe and begins a journey of sexual exploration with that volleyball player who he's been in love with. And he describes that moment when he first is able to, I suppose, breach the barrier as being like entering the temple and touching the idol in the sanctum sanctorum, right? Which, you know, struck both Arvind and me when he described it to me as a remarkable metaphor of sexual joy and experience. I'd wager that you'd almost never hear a metaphor written in those terms. It is fantastic. When you wrote this, when you put it out, were reactions from the general critical readership and your general readership, were they noteworthy in any way, or were they just about, you know, the same as previous works you've put out? But also, Vasudhendra, what do you think that this had a particularly different trajectory because it's written in Kannada and published in Kannada? And how do you feel things might have been different otherwise?
Yeah, I knew that because see, there was a difference here. If it is my first book, things would have been different. But I had already 10 books which I have written, and I had established readership in Kannada. So most of my books, a minimum of 6 to 7 reprints they have seen. One book has seen 15 reprints. So it's like they're part of almost all the textbooks.
How many copies is each print run? Just
1,000 generally. It's 1,000 books which I do. So a lot of readership was there, and most interestingly, I had readers of a 4th, 5th standard student. And also I had readers of 80, 85 years old person. So that kind of a range it was there. And I had never ever written anything about sex in my box. So till now, all the 10 books. And suddenly when this book came, and I didn't publish these stories in any of the newspapers or in magazines, literary magazines, anywhere. I had just wrote it and I had kept it with password. Actually, I had not even allowed anyone to read. But when I published, I was worried. I was very much worried. And you know, I told you that it's on December 11th. That was a very important day for us because the 377 Supreme Court said on the same day. That tension also raised me. So I had written a book on the same day the Supreme Court is giving this kind of anti-human ruling actually. So that was happened. But what happened is, so like my previous book, like this book, the first print got sold out within 2 weeks. So all books were sold out and I had to do a second reprint on the 3rd week itself. But they didn't realize that what I have written is something like this. Though there were shocks, some of them lot of appreciation, some of them started crying, some of them were very angry, some of them became silent, some of them came closer to me, some of them moved away from me. All that happened. Okay, so it's in a way it's better. It's not. I'm changed. I don't have a pattern now, so I can give a shock, totally a different subject, and it was burning in me to write these stories. That was more. I waited for so many years, 20 years almost, to write these stories, and I have written it now. So it's more for me than for my reader.
That's fantastic. Do you have plans to?
Yeah.
Do you have plans to translate it into English? Are there any offers, or do you want to?
I think any good works will get translated to other languages. I don't have to hurry it up, and I don't have to initiate on that. I'm not interested. Someone who finds it good will come one day to do the translation. For me, first important thing is to write. I have to write, whatever the language it may be. I have to finish it up, my writings, when I have the idea, when I have the spirit, when I have the energy. I don't think it will there for long. So I have to write it down. That's my first primary thing. Tomorrow, someone is going to do the translation. I'm not very much concerned on that. It's someone's job, it's not mine. I don't take initiative on translating. Instead, I do translation from other languages because I feel that's important for me.
That's fantastic. You know, on the note of translation, one of the nicest things that I read about 5 or 6 years ago when it came out, and actually the first time I heard about you, and I think the first time anyone heard about BLAFT, which, by the way, if there's anyone who doesn't know yet about BLAFT, which is this incredible publishing company that Rakesh and his partner Rashmi run in Chennai, they do what is really just some of the most astonishingly sexy work that's being produced in India. Just by a long shot over anything else that exists. And
not as sexy as this.
there's a lot of sexiness here, yes. There's big competition of sexiness. But, you know, the first time that we heard of you was when you translated Tamil pulp fiction. So when you,
That was the first book, yeah.
That was the first book. And it
one
was
of the three first
Tamil
books.
pulp fiction, right? Which went on to have a sequel. Did you ever get to see that, or did you ever get to read that? Yeah, it's called Tamil Pulp Fiction, and it's weird, isn't it? Because it's a book that's translated into English, which therefore probably renders it, you know, fairly meaningless to, let's say, the Kannada reading public in Bangalore, right? I mean, as a result, strangely, right? Had you heard of it when it came out? But that really sort of changed people's minds about what they thought they knew and didn't know, and what they should know. What do you feel about that book now, 6 years into its first run?
Yeah, I mean, we sort of started BLAFT with the idea that this English-speaking publishing world is a little bit like in a bubble in India. Like, there's a whole lot of publishing happening in India that the English-speaking scene doesn't know about or doesn't pay attention to. And it's happening in all the 22 official languages. It's happening in like a lot of languages which aren't official. I mean, we've gone to the Northeast last year and seen there are like, you know, 3 different daily newspapers being published in Kasi. There's like short stories coming out in Kasi. Mizo publishing is very vibrant. They have like the unauthorized translations of Stephanie Meyer's Twilight trilogy have sold 20,000 copies in Mizo.
That's
so, I mean, this is like, you know, what's going on in little languages in the country that like people don't know about. They're just not aware. People don't look at the market of these languages. They don't think about them. But so we were in Chennai and we were seeing that the best-selling authors in Tamil, the best-selling authors in the language had never been translated. The stuff which was translated was stuff which was sort of had the stamp of approval from the Sahitya Academy. Was generally like about serious social issues.
Sweet, respectable literature.
I mean, some of it's really good and important, and you know, but also a lot of it tends to be about caste conflict or like problems faced at the village level, which are so culturally specific that maybe they're not the easiest thing to translate into and read in another language. Whereas a detective story can be translated in another language quite easily, or a pulp romance. So that was the idea behind it. We started with Tamil. We wanted to get into lots of other languages. We've translated some books from Urdu, from a famous detective author, Ibn Safi. And we looked at a Nigerian language, or West African language, Hausa, which is one of the few indigenous African languages which has a vibrant publishing scene.
And so that book, which actually I think you should talk about because that's quite remarkable. It's not the first, but it's one of the first, and it's certainly one of the very few Hausa novels which have been translated into English. It's published as Sin is a Puppy That Follows You Home. As far as I know, sold quite well, but it's got incredible critical appreciation, and recent shipments of your book back to Nigeria, where it was originally published, I think was seized as contraband or something.
Yeah, we sent 2 packages of the book to Nigeria, and one of them went through Bombay Customs, and the other one came back marked suspicious package. And we had to pay to send it again.
Which, yes,
no metal in the package. I don't know what that is.
And they had a point, right? Because I mean, I think your books are a suspicious package. But this is the newest BLAF publication. It's called The Obituary Journal. This is the 2nd volume. It came out a few months ago, and it follows Obituary Journal Volume 1, which was an exceptional book. They're both exceptional books. I think the first one, did it have a theme?
It was kind of a grab bag, yeah.
It was just anything.
It's a visual
the second
book.
one has a theme. It's non-veg. They're incredible books. They're available to you outside. But I wager that for this price, $7.95, it's gone up a little since the last time, to find this degree of care and detail and artistic sophistication in a book that's been produced start to finish in India, it's just extraordinary, and I congratulate you for doing this. But I think there's a way by which, so Rakesh and Rashmi and BLAF, their project with this particular series of books is to try and devalue the word and to have a slightly crazier, more chaotic sense of what could constitute literature. And the thing I like most about that is, how everyone is always saying, the novel is dead, or print is dead, or text is dead, everything is always dead. But there's a way by which pulp fiction, a way by which this crazy sort of polyglot language we speak, in fact, could well be the language that you express in this book, which is, disjointed, image-based artistry, which is non-linear graphic art, which is random word art, where literally you just take words and you create art. Every other kind of random thing that I can think of, put together in a weird way, I think is a little closer to the language that most people speak in some way or another. No, the language we speak is some kind of strange stream of images and half conversations, and people who one has never met, and all kinds of influences from near and very far. And there is a way by which I think the language that you capture in both the obituary journals really reflects that. What do you think?
Right. Yeah. So for the non-veg issue, we were just we were thinking about how political meat is in this country, and how there's all these issues of religion and caste and politics around it, and the Hyderabad beef riots that happened around the time we started thinking about the books. And but it's also like such a goofy thing, right? You think about food and eating a sausage is like it's a strange sort of bizarre act. So we wanted to get different impressions on meat eating from lots of different people. There's there's everything from some images which have been contributed by PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, as well as an essay a poem by Meena Kandasamy about the abuse that she faced from right-wing Hindu online trolls and stuff after she stood up for the beef festival organizers in Osmania University, and then some of it's just completely goofball. So
great goofball stuff. I mean, yeah, exceptionally well done goofball stuff. There's this really good book that came out a couple of years ago. It's by David Shields, and it's called Reality Hunger. And it was one of those books that captured kind of, it sort of established a 6-month footprint in, in the academic world, and primarily because its thesis was really interesting. At the sort of peak end of, the worst version of a certain kind of reality hunger, which I would say is Big Brother or another kind of low-grade reality television show. David Shields produced this book in which his thesis was that in some sense, so it was I think the most intelligent, the only variation of this ridiculous novel is dead articulation that I could follow. But the thesis was this, that there is a sort of fiction fatigue. The world we live in is a world that is most intensely marked by a reality hunger. The idea of watching Times Now over a soap opera that might be playing at the same time, I think is emblematic of that. I just watched a debate yesterday between a few people, well, one person I know and 3 other people I don't know, about surveillance. It was conducted in Canada. It was about horrific things for which people are paying horrific jail terms and exiles in Russia and so on. And I wrote to one of the people who was in that, and I said, look, I watched the debate and I enjoyed it very much, but also what a ridiculous word that is to say. I enjoyed this debate because it's about an issue that's incredibly serious and sad, and it seems as though the language that we use to capture what we see as reality entertainment is often not language that's kept up with the horrors of what reality is. But in that sense, and in a slightly similar way, I think that and forgive me for ascribing a political project to it, and you're welcome to clarify that you don't have one. Is this book, The Obituary Journal, just easier to read? Is this the kind of thing that people simply like more than a whole set of words that could have been printed on these carefully done 600-word pages?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people in publishing are talking about moving to shorter forms and how nobody has patience for novels anymore, and short stories are getting shorter, and flash fiction is taking off, and people are reading blog posts and microfiction, and we're reading on our phones at the bus stop, so we read small little sections of text instead of big long pieces of text. And I feel like comics and graphic art doesn't have that problem, because you do consume it faster, but it's also nice to have a book so you can go back and look at it again, right? I mean, it's a nice thing to own, whereas I think text is sort of in this strange state right now where nobody's sure if you need to own it anymore. Maybe it's just all online and you can go and get it from the archive whenever you feel like reading it. Maybe it's not something that you purchase anymore. Maybe novels aren't something that is a commodity. Maybe it's just shared information. Whereas I think comics are a little different that way. It is nice to have an artifact.
So we have about 10 or 15 minutes left, and so perhaps how about if I ask you one last question, and then would you like to just discuss this as if you have questions, and we can talk about anything you'd like. So the question I'm curious about is, why do you think we're here together? I mean, not me, but the 3 of you, right? So there's queer literature, there's erotica or pornography, which is a discussion we'll continue. And when I say that, I mean it as the highest compliment, and pulp fiction, right? It does seem a bit strange that these 3 categories are together. And one of the reasons it seems strange is that the categories themselves are slightly suspect, right? So, Rakesh's Obituary Journal is ostensibly entitled Non-Veg. It's about the politics of meat. Now, you'd think that it's some, ranting rant for meat. But in fact, actually, it has all kinds of sophisticated takes on the hypocrisies or the, subtle ludicrousys of PETA activists. Or, in fact, the massive hypocrisy that each one of us indulges in every day by eating meat in this completely industrialized, factory-farmed manner that it's produced and that we usually consume it in. And so on. So it's a far, far more intelligent and sophisticated animal than it appears to be, right? Even though it's advocating for eating it. Rosalyn's book, which I've had the pleasure of reading in manuscript form, is, by her account, definitely not pornography. I think that it's in that sublime space, which is not the kind of erotica that is so pleasant and anodyne that it's respectable. That would have been really boring to read. This was not. I'd say that it's exciting. I'd say that it could qualify in so many different kinds of genres that that's what makes it exciting. Apart from the fact that we just never hear like a fun, non-tragic, non-bubbly tale of a memoir of lust. And so for that, I enjoyed reading it very, very much, and I'm glad you wrote it. Vasudhendra's book, which I have started, which I look forward to finishing, was described by Arvind as being absolutely the kind of gay literature, a ridiculous phrase, but the kind of literature that is largely about people who have some kind of alternate sexuality, but is very much literature. It's not an activist pamphlet. There's nothing wrong with activist pamphlets. It's just that this Vasudhendra writes literature. He's a writer, produces literature, and this is very much so. And it's remarkable because when he connects about it, for instance, at a meeting in Bangalore recently, apparently, many transgender, transsexual people who were in the audience and who heard the story, particularly the story of the bedbugs, Tagane, were moved to tears, and these are people who would smell out a well-intentioned but unartistic literary effort from a mile away, which therefore obviously counts as a great achievement. So why do you think the three of you are here together on a panel? Vasudhendra, you first.
Any combination which is done tastefully looks good. We don't have to really worry about it. I always take rainbow as our
I just want to say, don't accuse me of being tasteful, but yes.
Yeah, so take a rainbow. So if a color has been different, instead of indigo coming here and it's going there, it doesn't make much of a difference for me. So it's a nicely, neatly made rainbow kind of things. A tasteful selection of anything will always be good in nature. If it is not, it will always be ugly. However, intentionally you collect them, it will be ugly.
That's a very diplomatic answer. It's a very diplomatic answer. Rakesh is seething because you called his work tasteful. He's not happy at all, I can tell you.
I like the idea that we've discussed totally different genres, and I like the ideas sometimes when related always similarities with always points of association. And I think sometimes it's nice to actually have things very different because the narrative goes to. I'm actually really both of you.
Also very diplomatic, thank you.
Can I ask a question of these two?
Sure.
So for Vasudhendra, I'm interested in, I know a little bit about the history of American pulp fiction, and gay and lesbian pulp fiction was a really big thing in the 50s, and there were all these very lurid covers which are very famous and everything. So you write literature, and it's a lot more serious than that. But I'm wondering, in Kannada, is there any tradition of pulp or pornographic queer literature? Does that exist? Will it exist?
No.
Online? Anything now?
It's very rare. Maybe to some extent, in the part of the fiction, they would have bought some heterosexual sexual details. But as far as the gay or lesbian thing, it's almost rare. It's more homophobic. If you want to bring a character of a gay man, he will be the most worst possible person on the earth. That kind of a person they have predicted, including the famous authors like Gnanapita awardees. They have done it in that fashion only. It's very recently, maybe I can say from past 10 years. So here and there, we started seeing some positive attitude from the writers, especially from the younger generation.
Vasudhendra, but what about pulp fiction? Not serious literature. So what about magazines that are sold in train stations? And can I offer an example? In North India, you get a magazine called Crime and Detective. And I'm, I think, probably the only subscriber in Bangalore to Crime and Detective. It's an extraordinary magazine. Every year, every issue has a sort of a photo story, which is usually luridly sexual. Everything in Crime and Detective is sexist, maybe mildly homophobic even sometimes, but at the same time, Crime and Detective has an annual transsexual issue. And the annual transsexual issue is again about true crimes involving transsexuals. It's done without any kind of judgment whatsoever. And as a result, their advice columns is swamped every year when they produce this issue by hundreds of thousands of letters from Middle India about questions around sexuality. And it's a remarkable enterprise, and it survives entirely below the radar of a kind of middle-class Anglophone audience and readership. Is there nothing like that you've ever...
College days, I remember I was reading some pornographic magazines in Kannada, but nowadays I hardly read any of those, okay? So I don't know really what's the scene. As far as I know, even if it is there, it will be related with the heterosexual only, nothing related with the homosexual. As far as
Do you think there's a future for it? Do you think there's a future for it?
Yeah, in future the people will accept it. Definitely it's going to be there. The need. It's like anything else, right? It's rather than writing a crime novel, it's better to write a sex novel. Yeah. It's more
crime
healthy.
and sex novel. Rakesh,
Okay,
what are your concluding thoughts on why we are together?
I just wanted to ask her another question.
So,
I wanted to ask the erotica writer what she
would
thinks
anyone
of-
else like to ask anything or talk to any of these fine people about...
Okay. Can I ask Rosalyn a question? I just wanted to know, as an erotica writer, what are your feelings on this trend of Amazon Kindle books about like sex with the werewolf and dino porn and like I don't know if you've seen this.
The dino porn thing actually is
There's
really
there's
interesting.
quite a bit of this stuff coming out, and slash fiction. You know, the proliferation of slash fiction, which is apparently now an international phenomenon. I was in Kuala Lumpur last week, where I met a Filipino publisher who says that Tagalog slash fiction involving like real film stars in the Philippines, like invented porn fan fiction about these people, is huge. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on this. Is it trash?
This is much better, by the way. Very different.
I suppose, but you know, it comes to very sometimes, right? But I